The grand hall of the Valkyrie Palace shimmered with crystalline light as Princess Shathra stood before the peace delegation. Her translucent skin glowed with the soft blue bioluminescence of her species, a sign of the anxiety she could not fully hide. Around her, the council members of her people whispered among themselves, their crystalline bodies refracting the light in patterns of concern and doubt. 3 years of war had brought both civilizations to their knees. The Valkyrie Empire, ancient and proud, had underestimated the human colonies when conflict first erupted over territorial disputes. The humans, newcomers to this sector of space, had proven far more resilient than anyone expected. Neither side could claim victory, and both had lost too much to continue. The peace accords sat on the ceremonial table, written in both languages. Zathra had read every word a dozen times. Most of it was standard diplomatic language about borders, trade rights, and military restrictions. But one clause made her pulse quicken every time she saw it. Article 7. The Marriage Alliance. To cement the peace and create an unbreakable bond between their peoples. Princess Zathra would marry a human representative. It was an old tradition among the Valkyrie, though never before had it been used with an alien species. Her father, Emperor Velthor, had explained that this sacrifice would save millions of lives. Zathra had agreed without hesitation, though fear gnawed at her insides. What would her husband be like? Humans were so different from her people. They were short-lived, emotionally volatile, and their bodies were made of soft flesh instead of living crystal. The war footage had shown human soldiers as fierce and relentless, using weapons and tactics that seemed brutal to Valkyrie sensibilities. She imagined her future husband would be some scarred military commander. Rough and intimidating. The doors to the hall opened with a resonant chime. The human delegation entered, led by their ambassador, a gray-haired woman named Chen Wei. Behind her walked a younger man, carrying a small container. He wore simple civilian clothes in shades of blue and gray. Nothing like the military uniforms Zathra had expected. His hair was dark and neatly trimmed, and his movements were careful and measured. Ambassador Chen introduced him. Your Majesty, honored council members, may I present Captain James Chen, who has volunteered to serve as the human representative in this historic union. James stepped forward and bowed in the Valkyrie manner, which he performed awkwardly but with obvious effort to get it right. When he looked up at Zathra, his brown eyes were calm and kind. He spoke in her language, his accent thick but understandable. Princess Zathra, I bring a gift from my world as a symbol of peace and new beginnings. He opened the container, and a sweet fragrance filled the hall. Inside were delicate pink and white flowers, their petals perfectly preserved in a stasis field. Zathra had studied earth biology and recognized them immediately. Cherry blossoms, James explained. In my culture, they represent the beauty of life and the importance of cherishing each moment. I thought, I hoped you might find them beautiful. Zathra was speechless. She had prepared herself for a warrior, perhaps someone cold and calculating. Instead, she found herself looking at a man who brought flowers and spoke of cherishing moments. Her council members exchanged glances of surprise and, she noticed, some disappointment. Was this really the best the humans could offer? The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later. It blended traditions from both cultures, creating something entirely new. James learned the Valkyrie vows phonetically and spoke them with careful precision. When it was done, Zathra wore a circlet of gold and crystal, and James wore a matching band on his finger. They were married, two strangers bound together by the hope of peace. The weeks that followed were strange and surprisingly pleasant. James moved into the royal residential wing, though Valkyrie custom allowed them separate quarters until they grew comfortable with each other. He spent his days exploring the palace, always with a sketchbook or painting supplies in hand. Zathra would find him in the gardens, creating watercolor paintings of the bioluminescent flowers that bloomed in the eternal twilight of their moon. He was gentle and thoughtful in ways that surprised her. He asked questions about Velkhari history and culture with genuine curiosity. He attended the palace's art exhibitions and philosophical debates, listening more than speaking. He never raised his voice, never made demands, and seemed content to let Zathra take the lead in all things. The court began to gossip. Her military advisors were the worst, suggesting that the humans had deliberately sent a weak representative to make the Velkhari lower their guard. "Look at him," General Caxthor said one day. "He spends his time painting flowers, while real leaders make decisions. The humans mock us with this choice." But Shathra found herself disagreeing, though she kept it to herself. She began joining James in the gardens, at first out of duty, but soon because she enjoyed his company. He told her stories about Earth, about great cities and wild forests, about oceans that covered most of the planet. He cooked meals from his world, strange combinations of flavors that somehow worked together beautifully. "Why did you volunteer for this?" she asked him one evening, as they sat beneath the palace's observation dome, watching the stars. James was quiet for a long moment. "I was tired of war," he finally said. "I wanted to be part of building something instead of destroying it. And I thought, maybe I could make a difference this way." "Do you miss your old life?" He smiled, a sad expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Some parts. I miss my friends, my family. But this is important. You're important." Zathra felt warmth spread through her crystalline body, a glow she couldn't suppress. She was beginning to think that perhaps this arranged marriage might become something real, something good. That night, she fell asleep feeling more hopeful than she had in years. She had been given an unexpected gift, a kind, harmless companion who genuinely seemed to care about her and her people. But late that same night, Zathra woke to use the facilities. As she passed James's quarters, she heard his voice through the door, speaking in rapid human language. The tone was completely different from his usual gentle manner, clipped, precise, professional. She caught phrases that made no sense to her. Extraction protocols, deep cover, and operational security. She stood frozen outside his door, her bioluminescence dimming with confusion and the first touch of fear. The conversation ended abruptly. Chathra quickly moved away, returning to her own chambers. A moment later, James's door opened. She watched through a crack in her doorway as he looked up and down the hallway, his posture alert in a way she had never seen before. Then his shoulders relaxed, and he returned to his room. The next morning, James was his usual cheerful self at breakfast. When Zathra carefully mentioned she thought she heard him talking late at night, he smiled apologetically. "Just some old friends from my service days," he explained. "They check in sometimes. I hope I didn't wake you." His explanation was reasonable, his tone warm and sincere. Zathra decided she was being paranoid. The war had made everyone suspicious. She chose to trust the man she was coming to know, the gentle artist who brought her flowers and made her laugh. 2 months passed in peaceful routine. Zathra began to believe that her life had found a new, unexpected harmony. Then, on a quiet afternoon while James was painting in the eastern gardens, an encrypted message arrived at the Palace Communications Center. It was addressed specifically to Captain James Chen, using military-grade human encryption that the Velkhari systems could barely detect. The communication officer brought the alert to Zathra. She stared at the notification, her crystalline fingers trembling slightly. The message itself was locked, impossible to read without James's personal codes. But the subject line was visible, translated into Velkhari script. "Priority alert. They found you. Cross is coming." Zathra's world tilted. Suddenly, James's gentle smiles and harmless hobbies seemed like pieces of a picture she had been looking at wrong. Who was Cross? Who had found James? And most importantly, what had her husband been hiding? She went to find him immediately, the message clutched in her hand, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. In the garden, James was cleaning his brushes, humming a melody from Earth. He looked up at her approach and smiled, that same warm expression she had grown to trust. "Zathra, perfect timing. I just finished a new painting of the moonflowers. Would you like to see?" He stopped when he saw her face, saw the message in her hand. For just a fraction of a second, something changed in his eyes. Something cold and calculating flickered across his features before the gentle expression returned. "We need to talk," Zathra said, her voice barely steady. "Right now. No more secrets." James set down his brushes carefully, and when he looked at her again, she saw a stranger looking back. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's time you knew the truth about who I really am." James followed Zathra to her private chambers in silence. The walk through the palace corridors felt endless. Palace guards bowed as they passed. Servants smiled at the royal couple, completely unaware that everything was about to change. Zathra's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Once inside her chambers, she sealed the door and activated the privacy shields. The room hummed softly as the anti-surveillance field engaged. Only then did she turn to face her husband. "Explain," she said, holding up the message. "All of it. The truth." This time, James stood near the window, his posture different now. The relaxed, casual stance was gone. He stood like a soldier, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides. When he spoke, even his voice sounded different, harder, more controlled. "My full name is Captain James Michael Chen, formerly of the Human Defense Force Special Operations Division. Before I came here, before I became your husband, I commanded classified missions during the war between our peoples." Kathra felt her bioluminescence flicker with shock. "You were a soldier, a commander." "More than that," James continued, his eyes meeting hers steadily. "I was a handler for black operations teams, the missions that no government admits exist. Sabotage, intelligence gathering, strategic elimination of high-value targets. I was good at it. Too good." The man before her seemed like a complete stranger. Zathra backed away slightly, her crystalline body dimming with fear and anger. Everything was a lie. The gentle artist, the peace-loving diplomat, all of it. A performance. "No," James said firmly. "That part was real. That part is who I wanted to be, who I'm trying to be. But you asked for the truth. And the truth is that I'm both people, the soldier and the artist, the killer and the husband who brings you flowers." Before Zathra could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the palace. The emergency communications system activated, filling the room with the voice of the defense coordinator. "Alert! 3 unidentified human vessels have entered Velkari sovereign space. They are not responding to hails and have refused to identify themselves. All defensive systems are now active." Gathra rushed to the window. In the distant sky, she could see the shimmer of the planetary defense shields activating. 3 dark shapes moved against the stars, sleek and predatory. James was already at her communications terminal, his fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. He pulled up tactical displays that Zathra didn't even know her personal terminal could access. His face grew grim as he studied the data. "It's Cross," he said quietly. "Vice Admiral Marcus Cross, my former commanding officer. He's come to finish what he started." "I don't understand," Zathra said, struggling to process everything. "Why would a human admiral attack us? We have a peace treaty." James pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking very tired. "During the war, I discovered something. Cross was running unauthorized operations, targeting Velkari civilian installations to prolong the conflict. He had financial interests in the military-industrial complex. The longer the war lasted, the richer he became. I gathered evidence to expose him. Why didn't you? I tried. But Cross had powerful friends in the government. Instead of investigating him, they investigated me. I was accused of treason, of making up stories to cover my own failures. They couldn't execute me without a trial that might expose everything, so they offered me a choice. Accept this diplomatic posting and stay silent, or face court-martial on fabricated charges. Zathra sat down across from him, her mind reeling. So you came here to hide. I came here because I was tired of fighting and thought I could do some good, James corrected. I thought Cross would leave me alone, that burying me on an alien world would be enough for him. I was wrong. The communications terminal chimed. A new message appeared. This one, broadcasting on all channels. A human face filled the screen. A man in his 50s, with gray hair and cold blue eyes. He wore an admiral's uniform decorated with medals. Captain Chen, the man said, his voice smooth and confident. I know you can hear me. You have something that belongs to me, and I've come to collect it. I'm giving you 1 hour to surrender yourself and hand over all copies of the evidence you stole. If you don't, I will consider this palace a hostile military installation, harboring a human fugitive. Quote. The transmission ended. Kathra stared at the blank screen, then at James. He's bluffing. He can't attack us. It would restart the war. He doesn't care, James said. Cross is about to be appointed Supreme Commander of all human defense forces. Once he has that position, he can bury any investigation. But if my evidence goes public before then, his career is over. As if to prove his point, the palace shook. Distant explosions rumbled through the walls. The defense coordinator's voice returned, now edged with panic. The unidentified vessels are firing on our orbital platforms. They're trying to disable our shields. Xathra stood, her royal training taking over. I need to evacuate the palace. Get my people to safety. The bunkers can withstand orbital bombardment. That won't help if Cross sends ground forces, James said. He was already moving, pulling a small device from his pocket and pressing it against the wall. A hidden panel slid open, revealing equipment that definitely wasn't Velkari. Combat gear, weapons, sophisticated electronics, all carefully hidden in her own chambers. How long has this been here? Zathra asked, her voice barely a whisper. Since the second week, James admitted. I'm sorry. I hoped I'd never need it, but I always prepare for the worst. It's kept me alive this long. The royal guards burst through the door, weapons drawn. General Cax Thor was with them, his crystalline armor gleaming. Princess, we must get you to safety, and this human needs to be detained immediately. The guards moved toward James, but Zathra held up her hand. Stop. Your Highness, he's been lying to you. He's dangerous. I know exactly what he is, Zathra interrupted. She looked at James, at the combat gear he was already strapping on, at the tactical displays showing Cross's ships systematically destroying their defenses. She thought about the gentle man who painted flowers and told her stories. She thought about the soldier who had commanded black operations teams. She made her decision. General, evacuate all non-essential personnel to the lower bunkers immediately. Get the civilians as far from the palace as possible. What about you, Your Highness? Zathra looked at James. I'm staying here. Princess, James said carefully. You should go with them. What's coming next? You don't need to be part of it. This is my home, my people, Zathra said firmly. And despite everything, you're my husband. I made vows, and I keep them. Besides, you said Cross is desperate and dangerous. That means you'll need all the help you can get. James studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A small, genuine smile crossed his features, the first real expression she'd seen since the truth came out. All right. But we do this my way. General Caxthor, I need you to trust me, just for the next few hours. I know you have no reason to, but another explosion rocked the palace, much closer this time. Debris rained down from the ceiling. The defense coordinator's voice crackled through the damaged systems. Ground assault detected. Multiple dropships launched from the enemy vessels. Estimated time to landing: 4 minutes. Reading 30-plus hostile signatures in combat armor. Caxthor's expression hardened. 30 elite human soldiers against our palace guard. We're not trained for this kind of combat. No. James agreed, pulling on a tactical vest. But I am. Get your people protecting the evacuation routes and the bunkers. Leave the assault force to me. You? 1 man against 30? James checked a weapon that looked far too advanced for civilian possession, his movements efficient and professional. They're not just any 30 soldiers, General. They're special operations. Probably from my old unit. I know how they think, how they fight, what tactics they'll use. I trained most of them. He looked at Zathra one more time. Last chance to leave, Princess. Zathra activated the palace's security systems, bringing up camera feeds from every corridor and room. Show me what you need, soldier. Let's save my home. James's smile widened. And for the first time since she'd met him, Zathra saw both sides of him at once. The gentle artist and the dangerous warrior merged into one complete person. Stay in here where it's safe, he said, handing her a communication device. Watch the feeds and guide me through the palace. You know this place better than anyone. Together, we might actually survive this. The dropships appeared on the external cameras, descending through the atmosphere like deadly meteors. James moved to the door, then paused and looked back at her. Gothra, whatever you see me do in the next few hours, remember that I'm doing it to protect you and your people. The man who brought you flowers is still here. He's just not the only one. Then he was gone, moving through the palace corridors with a predatory grace she'd never seen before. Zathra watched the camera feeds as the dropships landed in the palace courtyard. Armored figures emerged, moving in perfect formation. They looked unstoppable. She activated the communication link. James, they're in the east courtyard, moving toward the main hall. His voice came back calm and steady. I see them. Let's begin. Zathra settled in front of the displays, her fear mixing with something unexpected anticipation. She was about to discover who her husband really was. And somehow, she suspected the soldiers coming for them were about to learn the same lesson. Chathra watched the security feeds with growing disbelief. The 30 soldiers moved through her palace like a machine, their formation perfect, their weapons ready. They wore heavy combat armor that made them look inhuman, and they communicated through hand signals with military precision. On another screen, she tracked James. He moved differently now, low and fast, using shadows and corners in ways she'd never imagined. He'd stripped off his civilian clothes and wore dark tactical gear. In his hands, he carried weapons that looked both familiar and alien to her. They're splitting into 3 teams? Zathra reported through the communication link. 10 soldiers heading to the throne room, 10 to the residential wing, 10 toward the command center. Good. James's voice came back. Exactly what I expected. They're following standard search and secure protocol. That's their first mistake. Quote, on time 7. Good. Quote, what do you mean? They're treating this like a normal operation. But I designed that protocol. I know every weakness in it. Zathra watched as James reached the ceremonial fountain in the grand hallway, the one he'd painted dozens of times. He pulled something from his pack and placed it in the water. Within seconds, he disappeared into a maintenance passage she didn't even know existed. The first team of soldiers entered the hall cautiously. Their leader made hand signals, and they spread out in a textbook formation. They approached the fountain carefully, weapons scanning for threats. James's voice whispered through the link. "Princess, cut the power to Section 7. Now." Zathra hesitated only a moment before accessing the palace systems. The lights in the grand hallway went dark. On the thermal cameras, she saw the soldiers switch to night vision. They kept moving forward, confident in their superior equipment. Then the fountain exploded. It wasn't a normal explosion. The blast was precisely controlled, shaped to throw water and decorative crystals outward in a specific pattern. The soldiers' night vision was overwhelmed by the sudden flash. They stumbled backward, temporarily blinded. James emerged from the maintenance passage behind them. He moved like liquid shadow, fast and silent. The first soldier didn't even see him coming. James struck the back of his knee, forcing him down, then delivered a precise blow to a weak point in the armor's neck seal. The soldier collapsed, unconscious, but alive. The second soldier turned, but James was already moving. He used the first soldier's body as a shield, then swept the second soldier's legs. Another precise strike. Another unconscious operative. "Contact! Contact in the Grand Hall!" one of the remaining soldiers shouted into his radio. But James was already gone, vanished back into the shadows like he'd never been there. Zathra's hands trembled as she watched. This was nothing like Velkhari combat, which was formal and honorable. James fought like a predator, using every advantage, exploiting every weakness. It was terrifying and mesmerizing at the same time. "Second team is entering the residential wing," she reported, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let them," James said. He was breathing hard now, but his voice remained calm. "I have a surprise waiting there." The residential wing was filled with artwork, musical instruments, and James's painting supplies, all the harmless hobbies that had convinced everyone he was weak. The soldiers moved through the rooms carefully, checking behind every door. One soldier stopped at James's studio. He picked up a paintbrush, examining it with what might have been amusement. Then he noticed the canvas on the easel, a beautiful painting of Zathra in the garden, unfinished. "Target's personal quarters," the soldier reported. "Lots of art supplies. This guy really is just a..." The floor beneath them gave way. James had weakened the supports over the past months, disguising his work as innocent renovations. The soldiers fell into the service level below, landing hard. Their armor saved them from serious injury, but the fall scattered them and broke their formation. Gas canisters, hidden in the musical instruments, activated automatically. The soldiers' filters protected them from toxins, but the smoke was so dense they couldn't see. James dropped down through the hole, landing in the middle of the confusion. Zathra lost sight of him in the smoke, but she could track the results. One by one, the soldiers' vital signs on their armor went from active to unconscious. James was taking them down systematically, using the environment he'd carefully prepared over months. "How is he doing this?" General Caxthor asked. He'd arrived in the command center and was watching the feeds with Zathra. "He's one man against 30 elite soldiers. He's not fighting fair," Kshathra said quietly. The third team had reached the command center, but they found it empty. Zathra had already evacuated the staff to the bunkers. The soldiers began setting up equipment, clearly planning to use the center as a base of operations. "Princess, remember those gardening drones I built?" James asked through the link. "The ones you used to tend the flowers? They weren't just for gardening." On the command center feeds, Kshathra watched as innocent-looking garden drones emerged from charging stations. They moved silently across the floor, unnoticed by the soldiers who were focused on their equipment setup. Then the drones activated their hidden function. Electromagnetic pulse bursts. carefully calibrated to disable armor systems without causing permanent damage. The soldiers' sophisticated suits went dead, locking up and leaving them immobilized inside their own armor. What the? One soldier managed before his communication system failed. James appeared in the doorway, breathing heavily now, his tactical gear torn in places. He looked at the immobilized soldiers almost sadly. "Sorry, guys," he said. "Orders are orders. But you'll be fine. The pulse doesn't hurt, and your armor will reboot in about 6 hours." He moved through the room quickly, securing their weapons and checking each soldier. Sothra noticed he was gentle despite the efficiency, making sure none of them were injured. 28 down, James reported. 2 still active. The command team probably their best operators. "Where are they?" Zothra asked, scanning all the feeds. "They're not showing up on your cameras because they're using active camouflage. Military grade. Very expensive. But I know where they're going." "Where?" "They're coming for you, Princess. They know I'll do anything to protect you. They're using you as bait." Zothra felt her bioluminescence flicker with fear. "Should I run?" "No. Stay exactly where you are. Trust me." "James? Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice suddenly soft, almost like the gentle man she'd first met. Gothra looked at the screens showing unconscious soldiers throughout her palace. She thought about the months of preparation, the careful planning, disguised as harmless hobbies. She thought about the man who brought her flowers and the soldier who was protecting her home. "Yes," she said. "I trust you." "Good. Because this next part is going to be scary. But I need you to play along. Can you do that?" Before she could answer, the command center door exploded inward. 2 figures materialized from thin air as their camouflage deactivated elite soldiers in advanced armor, weapons trained on Zothra. "Don't move, Princess," the leader said, his voice cold and professional through his helmet speakers. "Captain Chen, we know you can hear us. Show yourself, or we will be forced to harm the royal." Zothra raised her hands slowly, her heart pounding. General Caxthor reached for his weapon, but one of the soldiers pointed his gun directly at the general's head. "Everyone stays calm," the soldier said. "Chen, you have 10 seconds." The communication link was silent. Zothra began to wonder if James had actually abandoned her, if everything had been calculated and she was just another piece on the board. Then James's voice came through the palace-wide intercom system, and he was laughing. "You know what your problem is, Lieutenant Reeves? You're predictable. You always were. Show yourself, Captain." "I already did." Both soldiers spun around, but there was nothing behind them. In that moment of distraction, the ceiling panels above them opened. James dropped down, a move so fast and precise that Zothra barely tracked it. He landed between the 2 soldiers, and what followed was a display of close combat skill that seemed almost impossible. James moved like he knew exactly where each soldier would strike before they did it. He redirected their attacks, used their momentum against them, and exploited gaps in their armor with surgical precision. One soldier went down, unconscious. The other managed to land a solid hit that sent James sprawling backward. The soldier raised his weapon, but James kicked a chair that slid across the floor and knocked the gun aside. In the same motion, James swept the soldier's legs and delivered a final strike to the armor's weak point. Silence fell over the command center. James stood among the fallen soldiers, breathing hard, favoring his left side where he'd been hit. Blood seeped through his tactical vest. "James!" Zothra rushed to him, but he held up a hand. "I'm okay. It's not that bad." He looked at General Caxthor. "General, please secure these soldiers. They're not the enemy, they're just following orders from someone who lied to them." Caxthor stared at James with new respect. "You defeated 30 elite human soldiers. Alone." "I had help," James said, looking at Zothra. "The princess guided me through her palace, gave me tactical information, cut power at the right moments. This was teamwork." Zothra felt warmth spread through her despite the situation. But her relief was short-lived. The communication console activated on its own. Admiral Cross's face appeared, his expression furious. Very impressive, Captain Chen. You always were my best student. But this changes nothing. You've defeated my ground team. Yes. But now you've given me no choice. I'm authorizing orbital bombardment of your position. You have 5 minutes to evacuate whoever you can. Then I'm reducing that palace to dust. With you in it. The transmission ended. James looked at Sathra, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes for the first time. We need to get everyone deeper into the bunkers. Now. He's bluffing, Caxthor said. He can't just... The palace shook as the first warning shot struck the shields. Alarms blared throughout the building. He's not bluffing, James said grimly. Cross is desperate. And desperate men burn the world to hide their crimes. The palace trembled as another blast struck the shields. Warning lights flashed throughout the command center, and damage reports scrolled across every screen. Zathra watched the shield strength, dropping with each impact. 90%, 85%, 78%. We need to evacuate, General Caxthor said urgently. Get to the deep bunkers before the shields fail. James shook his head, wincing as he pressed his hand against his injured side. The bunkers won't help. Cross has ship-to-surface missiles that can penetrate 100 meters of rock. If we hide, we just die tired. Then what do we do? Sathra demanded, fighting to keep panic out of her voice. James moved to the communication console, his fingers flying across the controls despite his injury. We make him come down here, force him to face me directly. That's suicide, Caxthor protested. Cross is augmented with military-grade enhancements. The reports say he's nearly invincible in combat. Nearly, James agreed. But not completely. And more importantly, if he lands here, his ships can't fire on the palace without risking him. It gives us time. Time for what? Jathra asked. James pulled up a data file on the screen, the evidence he'd mentioned. Detailed records of Cross's war crimes. Time to transmit this to every news network in known space. Once it's public, Cross loses everything, even if he destroys us. His allies won't protect him anymore. He activated the transmission protocols, but error messages flooded the screen. He's jamming all outgoing signals. I can't send anything while his ships are in position. Another impact shook the palace. Shield strength dropped to 60%. James opened a direct channel to Cross's flagship. Admiral, I have a proposal. You want me dead, and you want your evidence destroyed. Come down here and face me yourself. 1-on-1. No orbital bombardment, no more soldiers. Just you and me, like the old days. There was a long pause before Cross's face appeared on the screen. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You're challenging me to single combat? James? We both know how that ends. I'm augmented. Faster, stronger, nearly impossible to hurt. You're just a regular human who's already wounded. True, James admitted. But you're also a coward who hides behind soldiers and ships. Prove me wrong. Come down here and finish what you started. Cross's smile faded, replaced by cold anger. You always knew how to push my buttons, Captain. Fine. I accept. But understand, when I'm done with you, I'm still destroying this palace and everyone in it. The Valkyrie will learn what happens when they harbor human traitors. If you can beat me, James said quietly. Big if. The transmission ended. Minutes later, a single shuttle detached from Cross's flagship and descended toward the palace. Zathra watched it land in the grand courtyard through the security feeds. This is insane, she said. You can barely stand. How can you possibly fight someone with military augmentations? James checked his weapons, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his injury. I'm not going to fight him the way he expects. Augmentations make you stronger and faster. but they also make you confident. Overconfident. That's his weakness. James. Jothra grabbed his arm, her crystalline fingers trembling. You don't have to do this. We can run. Find another way. He looked at her, and his expression softened. For a moment, she saw the gentle artist again, the man who painted flowers in her garden. If we run, he follows. If we hide, he finds us. And eventually, more people die. This is the only way to end it. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. This is my palace, my home. Zothra's bioluminescence flared with determination. I'm not hiding while you fight my battles. Zothra, please. I'm coming, she said firmly. As your wife, and as the princess of the Valkyrie. That's final. James studied her face, then sighed in resignation. Stay behind me. If things go bad, you run. Promise me. I promise, she lied. They made their way to the grand atrium, the largest open space in the palace. Cross was already there, waiting. He'd removed his helmet, revealing a face that might have been handsome once but now seemed cold and artificial. Blue light pulsed beneath his skin, where the augmentations ran through his body. Princess Zothra, Cross said with mock courtesy. How unfortunate that your husband has dragged you into this. I have no desire to harm you, but I will if necessary. My husband didn't drag me anywhere, Jothra replied, lifting her head proudly. Cross laughed. How touching. James always did have a way of making people believe in him. He looked at James, and his expression hardened. Last chance, Captain. Tell me where all copies of the evidence are, and I'll make this quick. You first, James said. Surrender to Valkyrie authorities, and face trial for your crimes. We both know that's not happening. Cross moved, and Zothra barely tracked it. One moment he was standing still. The next, he was a blur of motion. His augmented speed carried him across the atrium in a heartbeat. His fist struck James in the chest, sending him flying backward into a decorative pillar. The crystal structure shattered on impact. James crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. James! Gothra ran toward him, but Cross stepped in her way. Watch and learn, princess. This is what happens to traitors. James struggled to his feet, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. But instead of fear, Zothra saw calculation in his eyes. He'd positioned himself deliberately, using the broken pillar pieces around him. Cross charged again, but this time James was ready. He rolled aside at the last second, and Cross's augmented fist struck the floor where James had been, cracking the crystal tiles. James grabbed a shard of broken pillar and struck at Cross's leg, aiming for the joint in the augmentation. The shard shattered against the Admiral's enhanced skin, but it made Cross stumble. James used the opening to create distance, moving behind another pillar. You can't hide forever, Cross roared, his augmented strength allowing him to tear the pillar from its foundation and hurl it aside. The battle became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Cross was faster and stronger, but James knew the palace. He led Cross through the atrium, using the architecture itself as a weapon. When Cross destroyed a support beam, James positioned himself so the falling debris rained down on the Admiral. When Cross fired energy blasts from his augmented hand, James used the reflective crystal walls to redirect the shots. But it wasn't enough. Cross was too powerful, too enhanced. James was tiring, his injury bleeding worse now. Another strike sent him crashing through a decorative fountain. He didn't get up as quickly this time. Cross advanced slowly, savoring his victory. You were always clever, James. But clever doesn't beat superior evolution. Humans are meant to be enhanced, perfected. You're just a relic of what we used to be. James coughed, struggling to his hands and knees. Is that what you tell yourself? That the augmentations, Make you better? They just make you a monster. Better a monster who wins than a man who dies with principles. Cross grabbed James by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one hand. His augmented strength made it effortless. James struggled, but couldn't break free. Zothra screamed. Without thinking, she ran to the palace control panel and activated the ancient defense system, a Velkhari security measure from before the age of modern weapons. Crystalline spears erupted from the floor and ceiling, designed to trap intruders. One spear caught Cross through the shoulder, impaling him. His augmented body could withstand normal weapons. But the Velkhari crystal was different. It grew into wounds, preventing healing. Cross roared in pain and dropped James. But another spear struck James in the same side he was already injured on. It didn't fully impale him, but it tore through muscle and flesh. He fell to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. No! Jothra ran to him, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. Cross, still impaled but very much alive, laughed bitterly. Blood ran down his chest, but his augmented body was already trying to compensate. Congratulations, Princess. You just started a war. You killed a human admiral. Even if I'm a criminal, Earth's government has to respond. Political necessity. He coughed blood but kept talking, his voice weaker now. You saved one man, and doomed billions to another war. Was it worth it? Zothra felt horror wash over her. She looked at James, who was barely conscious in her arms. Had she just destroyed everything? Had her attempt to save him actually made everything worse? James's hand weakly gripped hers. His voice was barely a whisper, but she heard the smile in it. Evidence. Already sent. 20. News. Networks. Human and alien. Triggered. When my heart rate dropped. Below critical level. Cross's eyes widened. What? Dead man's switch. James breathed. Oldest trick. In the book. You were so focused on the jamming. You didn't think about automatic protocols. Understanding and rage crossed Cross's face. You planned this from the beginning. You wanted me to come down here. Wanted you to confess. All recorded. All transmitted. Along with the evidence. You're done, Admiral. Cross tried to move, but the crystal spear held him fast. His augmented body couldn't overcome it. Blood loss was finally catching up to even his enhanced physiology. His face contorted with fury and desperation. Then we all go down together, he spat. My ships have standing orders. If I don't check in within 30 minutes, they orbital bombard this entire location. James smiled weakly, blood on his teeth. Check again, Admiral. High above them, in orbit, the crew of Cross's flagship had received the transmitted evidence. They saw their admiral's confession, saw proof of his war crimes. They understood now that they weren't on a legitimate military operation, they were accomplices to an act of revenge and murder. The first officer of the flagship made a decision. He opened a channel to the palace. This is Commander Sarah Park of the human defense vessel Retribution. We have received evidence of Admiral Cross's criminal activities and his confession. We are standing down from hostile operations and requesting permission to render medical assistance to Captain Chen and any other wounded parties. Jothra looked up at the communication console, hope flooding through her. Cross's expression went from rage to despair. He slumped against the crystal spear, his augmented body finally failing. You always were. The best of us, James. I should have known. Better than to come after you. You should have known. Better than to break. Our oaths, James whispered. We were supposed to protect people, not profit from their deaths. The Admiral's eyes closed. His breathing became shallow. Gothra held James tighter as medical teams began rushing into the atrium. Not going anywhere, he murmured. Still have to. Finish that painting. Of the moonflowers. Then his eyes closed too, and Zothra's world went dark with fear. The medical bay hummed with activity, as human and Velkari doctors worked side by side. Zothra sat outside the surgical room, her crystalline hands clasped together, her bioluminescence dim with worry. General Caxthor stood nearby, along with several palace guards who had insisted on staying with their princess. Hours passed like centuries. Finally, a human doctor emerged, removing her surgical mask. She looked tired, but smiled when she saw Zothra. He's going to be fine, Your Highness. The wound was serious, but we got to him in time. He'll need several weeks of recovery, but there's no permanent damage. Zothra felt relief flood through her body, her glow brightening so much that several people had to look away. Can I see him? Can I see him? He's sleeping now. But yes, just for a few minutes. James lay on the medical bed, his chest rising and falling steadily. Bandages covered his torso, and monitoring equipment beeped softly beside him. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, without the weight of his secrets. Zothra sat beside him and took his hand carefully. You stubborn, foolish, wonderful human, she whispered. You could have died. His fingers squeezed hers weakly, and his eyes opened slightly. Princess, he murmured. Did it work? Yes, the evidence is everywhere now. Every news network in known space is broadcasting it. Cross's crimes, his confession, everything. James smiled faintly. Good, that's good. His eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep. Sorry I lied to you. About who I was. We'll talk about that when you're better, Zothra said softly. For now, just rest. The following days brought a storm of galactic attention. The evidence James had released was damning and complete. Vice Admiral Cross had not only orchestrated attacks on civilian targets during the war, but had also falsified intelligence reports to prolong the conflict. His financial connections to weapons manufacturers came to light, showing how he'd profited from every day of fighting. The human government had no choice but to respond. Earth's president issued a formal apology to the Velkari Empire, condemning Cross's actions and praising Commander Park and the crew who had refused illegal orders. Several high-ranking officials connected to Cross were forced to resign. The scandal shook the foundations of human military leadership. But there was also an outpouring of support for James. Fellow soldiers who had served with him came forward, speaking about his integrity and skill. The court-martial charges against him were officially dismissed, and he was offered full reinstatement with honors. Cathra read him the news reports as he recovered. He listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. They want you to come back, she said carefully, trying to keep her voice neutral. James looked at her for a long moment. What do you want? Shathra. Shathra. She hesitated. The question was more complicated than he knew. I want honesty. I want to understand who you really are. The gentleman who painted in my gardens. Or the soldier who defeated 30 elite warriors. Both, James said. I know that's a confusing answer, but it's the truth. The soldier is who I was trained to be, what the war made me. But the artist, the man who loves your gardens and your laugh, and the way you glow when you're happy, that's who I want to be. Can someone be both? Zothra asked. Can you carry weapons and paint flowers? Can you plan battles and appreciate poetry? I don't know, James admitted, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Zothra stood and walked to the window. Outside, repair crews were rebuilding the damaged sections of the palace. Life was returning to normal, but nothing felt the same. She thought about the past months, about the man she'd believed James to be, and the man he actually was. I was angry when I learned the truth, she said finally. I felt betrayed, like our entire marriage was built on lies. I understand if you want to end it, James said quietly. I can request a diplomatic reassignment. Leave quietly. I'm not finished, Zothra interrupted. She turned to face him. I was angry. Yes. But then I watched you fight. Not just with weapons, but with intelligence and preparation. You spent months hiding equipment, learning every corner of my palace, preparing for a threat you hoped would never come. You did all of that while being kind to my people, while painting and cooking and making me laugh. She moved back to his bedside. You could have fought Cross anywhere, but you chose my palace because you knew the defenses, knew how to protect my people. Even wounded and outmatched, you found a way to win without causing unnecessary death. Those 30 soldiers you defeated, they're all alive. You could have easily ended them, but you chose mercy. James looked surprised. I thought you'd see that as weakness. No, Zothra said firmly. I see it as strength. Velkhari warriors value honor, but we've forgotten that true honor includes compassion. You showed me that warriors can be gentle, that soldiers can be artists, that the same hands that defend can also create beauty. She took his hand again. So yes, I was angry. And yes, I still wish you'd trusted me sooner. But I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, as my husband. With all your contradictions and complexities, I want the soldier and the artist, the tactician and the gentleman who brings me flowers. James's eyes glistened with emotion. You're sure? Because my past comes with dangers. There might be others like Cross. Then we'll face them together, Zothra said. As partners. As equals. No more secrets. No more secrets, James agreed. 6 months later, the royal gardens had been completely restored and expanded. James spent his mornings there, tending to both Velkhari flowers and earth plants he'd imported. His paintings decorated the palace halls, peaceful scenes that visitors admired. But Zothra noticed the things others missed. The way James positioned himself to always have a clear view of entrances. The subtle tension in his shoulders when strangers approached. The garden tools arranged not just for convenience, but for quick access as potential weapons if needed. She didn't mind. She understood now that this was who James was. Someone shaped by war but reaching for peace. Carrying the skills of violence, but choosing creation instead. The human government had sent a new ambassador to replace James, a nervous young diplomat named Marcus Chen, James's younger cousin. Marcus arrived with ceremonial gifts and elaborate apologies, clearly terrified of making a mistake. James greeted him warmly in the garden, showing him the roses he'd planted from Earth. Don't worry so much, he told Marcus. The Velkhari aren't as scary as the reports make them sound. Just be respectful, be honest, and you'll do fine. Zothra watched them from a distance, amused by Marcus's obvious relief at finding James so approachable. The young ambassador had probably heard the stories the legendary Captain Chen, who'd defeated an augmented admiral and 30 elite soldiers. Meeting the gentle gardener must have been quite a surprise. Your husband is an interesting man, General Caxthor said, joining her on the terrace. Yes, he is, Zothra agreed. The soldiers who survived the attack have been asking about him. They want to apologize, to explain they were just following orders. What did James say? He invited them to visit once they're released from custody. Said he wants to show them the gardens. Caxthor shook his head in amazement. He defeats them in combat, then offers them friendship. I don't understand humans. Neither do I, completely, Zothra admitted. But I'm learning. That evening, as the palace's twin moons rose, Zothra found James in his studio. He was working on a new painting, a portrait of her standing in the garden, surrounded by both Velkhari flowers and earth roses. It's beautiful, she said, looking over his shoulder. Not yet, James said, studying the canvas critically. The light isn't quite right. Your glow changes throughout the day. And I'm trying to capture that specific moment when Sathra kissed him, cutting off his explanation. When she pulled back, James looked surprised. And happy. What was that for? For being exactly who you are, Zathra said. The soldier who fights to protect. The artist who creates beauty. The husband who still brings me flowers even though everyone now knows he could probably conquer a small planet if he wanted to. James laughed. A genuine sound of joy. I really don't think I could conquer a planet. Maybe a large building, with proper preparation and... She kissed him again to stop him from planning hypothetical military operations. Later, as they walked through the gardens together, Gothra thought about a human saying James had taught her months ago. Speak softly and carry a big stick. She'd thought it was about deception. About hiding strength behind gentleness. Now she understood it differently. It wasn't about deception at all. It was about choosing peace while maintaining the ability to defend it. It was about being strong enough to be gentle, skilled enough to show mercy, and wise enough to know when each was appropriate. James had taught her people something valuable, that true strength wasn't just about winning fights. It was about preventing them. About building things instead of destroying them. About choosing compassion over violence whenever possible. What are you thinking about? James asked, noticing her contemplative silence. About how the galaxy sees you now, Sathra said. The harmless human, who wasn't harmless at all. Does that bother you? No, she said, squeezing his hand. It makes me proud. You're proof that warriors can be poets, that soldiers can be gardeners, that the strongest people are often the gentlest until someone threatens what they love. James smiled and pulled her close. Above them, the stars shone bright, and somewhere among them were worlds that now knew the story of the human captain and the alien princess. It would become legend eventually, probably exaggerated and romanticized. But Jothra didn't care about legends. She cared about the man beside her, who painted flowers with the same hands that had saved her kingdom, who spoke softly but could roar like thunder when needed, who was exactly as harmless as he needed to be, and exactly as dangerous as necessary. Her husband, her partner, her gentle warrior, and she wouldn't have him any other way. The end.